Hello again, everybody. So we're going to do another raise your hand question. Who here has heard of DePIN? Raise your hand. Okay. So maybe just to kick off, this panel is going to be all about DePIN. So can one of our lovely panelists maybe just define it for the audience? What is DePIN?
I can take that one.
Please, yeah.
So I think, put in its simplest terms, DePIN is the decentralized infrastructure that powers all of the apps you use, the dApps you use, the programs you use. It's basically the foundation upon which everything Web3 rests.
And so I realized I made a moderator mistake, and I haven't, given these guys the opportunity to introduce their projects. So maybe everyone could just introduce yourself, your project, and anything else you want to touch on why DePIN. Feel free to go ahead and yeah.
Yeah, so I'm Jonas Hahn. I work for the Solana Foundation in the developer relations team. And in the last year, I also focused a bit on DePIN. And I think DePIN is like a super broad spectrum, actually. You can define all kind of things as DePIN. You can say like blockchain itself is DePIN. So we built a few examples. So you can, for example, connect your a Raspberry Pi with a Solana Pay transaction request. So you scan a QR code, and then you can control like an LED or build a decentralized bar or something. Or you can have all kind of other projects which we will probably touch on later. But.
Awesome. So my name is Tausif Ahmed. I'm VP of Business Development at IO.net. So IO.net, for those who don't know, is a DePIN building on Solana, where we're specifically focused on GPUs. So we're a decentralized GPU clustering network where we're pulling in latent compute capacity from independent data centers, crypto projects, crypto miners, all the way to sort of like consumer GPUs that exist in your PC, and connect that with demand on the other side from AI/ML developers, startups, and enterprises.
And I'm Frank Mathis, co-founder at Genesis Go. We built Shadow Drive, which is Solana's only native decentralized storage platform with a focus on not sacrificing the speed, performance, or speed, security, and stability that you expect when using traditional Web 2 cloud platforms.
Great. So let's talk about some Solana-specific DePIN use cases. DePIN, it's kind of been this buzzword this year. I probably first heard about it maybe 9 months ago, and I feel like in the last 6 months even, it's become a trending thing on Google News and Twitter. What are some Solana DePIN use cases that are already out there and released, and what are maybe some other ones that folks are working on that excite each of you?
Sure, start? Yeah, I'm very excited about Helium because what it could theoretically, if you don't know, it's a protocol where people basically put hotspots in their houses, and they provide around their flats or houses, they provide mobile internet for phones, and also a network which is called LoRaWAN, which stands for long-ranged WAN. So you can use these LoRaWAN sensors for all kind of things. So for example, some cities might use it to figure out if there's a fire or if there's water somewhere and some leaks and so on. And you can build all kind of cool things with this. And at some point, maybe I will just be able to travel around the world and just always use my Helium plan instead of just paying T-Mobile or whatever. And then there's many cool other projects. I don't know if I should list them all. This year I saw so many DePIN projects. Like there's HiveMapper, which is like decentralized mapping. Then there's like decentralized storage. There's like Shadow Drive, for example. I own it. There's like GPU renting and so on. But yeah, I saw so many projects where we can touch more on later. But this is one of them I'm excited about. And things that people can just build at home. That's really cool, I think.
Yeah, I think just to kind of build on top of that, I think a lot of the projects that Jonas just mentioned, I absolutely love. I think Helium probably has, with what they're trying to do, is could potentially be one of the most important companies out there, because I think decentralizing wireless internet networks is really critical for the future of Web3. But I think another one that I've been pretty interested in is building on Solana is Grass Protocol, which kind of coming from my background at IONet and kind of being really deep in sort of like the AI tech stack, I sort of think a lot about all these different ways that you can leverage DePINs to decentralize various parts of how we train and build AI models. And with data sort of like capture and sort of like data processing and essentially, yeah, with what Grass Protocol does is like essentially take people's like bandwidth that people can connect to the network and sort of like use that for data scraping and web scraping, which I think is really interesting because I think DePIN really thrives when there's the opportunity to leverage specific sort of devices that people already have and use in their day-to-day and kind of find a different way to use that and monetize that. I think that's sort of like sort of an underappreciated aspect of DePIN, and I think something that we'll kind of continue to see sort of like more development around in the future.
Yeah, so I agree with especially that the last part that's like super huge. I mean, kind of the same thing, right? Like all of the same projects that just got mentioned, they're all super cool and interesting. So I think, so I'll kind of zoom out a little bit because the things that interest me the most are things that they allow us to like decentralize, kind of the stranglehold that big tech cloud has on our world. They big tech. I mean, literally everything here, everything it's in your pockets, everything we're running everything on, right? It's what, like 78% of it or something like that is all in the hands of 4 companies, and then the remainder is in the hands of, let's say, maybe like a dozen others, all kind of waiting in the wings to get bought up by one of the big 4. And so anything in like the Web3 space and in the DePIN space that is allowing us as individuals to like take some ownership of those bytes as they're either sitting at rest or in motion, and then monetize those bytes kind of for the behalf or on the behalf of like us as individuals is incredibly interesting to me. So
yeah, I think you bring up a really good point, Frank. And this kind of made me think of another question, which it seems like in the way that you're describing it, DePIN is almost something that it affects all of us. Like whether you're in crypto, whether you're outside of crypto, and I think even in crypto specifically, like not everyone's going to be trading, not everyone is going to be playing games. Like we're not all going to be doing all of the crypto things. But with something like DePIN, I guess why do you think it's emerging from the crypto ecosystem in some sense, and maybe like what is the end goal here? Like what is this vision, very long term? I'm speaking, 30 to 50 years. Like what is that goal, and are we working on it now? Like have we entered the arena? Are we like standing outside the arena, kind of looking in? I'd love to start with your take on this one.
I appreciate it. So I think let me start with the last part of that first. So I think 30, 40, 50 years from now, Web3 is going to look, completely different than it does now. We don't, I don't think anybody, myself included, has any idea what that final form is actually going to look like. What we do know, right, is that what we're building now is setting is paving the way for whatever that, whatever the tech evolves into. It's, I think, one of the reasons why I think DePIN has become much more of like just a focus for Web3, kind of regardless of whatever ecosystem you're building on, is really twofold. In 2021 and 2022, there was this big like rush of interest from people in terms of crypto, in terms of Web3, and just being like, what is this all about? And as they started to look into it, as kind of like the normal crowd, traditional finance, traditional infrastructure, just your average person off the street, started to look into it. They saw something really cool, but they saw they saw the issues that kind of came with it, and those are issues that we as crypto native individuals, we're fine with because we tolerate them in the name of decentralization, right? Because to us, the benefits of decentralization, the trustlessness of the network, the lack of any central figure having control over us, that's extremely important. For others, not so much. For others, it's just a matter of, does it work? Does it work well? Can I do what I need to do on it? And, so I think the realization kind of happened that, let's say kind of over the course of 2023, that Web3 is, we're building wheels, but we're building hexagonal wheels and kind of, like trying to say that they're as good as regular wheels because look at these other benefits that we get, which isn't a knock on anything. That's how technology evolves. But what that did is that kicked off a conversation about what is it that we're expecting Web3 and decentralized infrastructure to do for us.
Yeah.
And I think that's the reason why, we've seen such a rise in interest around DePIN, because it's finally starting to, the focus is finally starting to happen on, okay, we built our building, pretty tall, pretty fast, vertically, but what kind of foundation is it sitting on, and can that foundation support the weight of everything we're trying to build? And I think, the answer was maybe.
No.
And I think that's what's, that's the part of the conversation that's being addressed now, which I think is a very good thing, very healthy thing.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, and just to kind of add on to that, I really like that analogy that Frank mentioned about sort of like the foundation of what we're trying to build on, because that's essentially what I really kind of place DePIN in that particular bucket, especially when it comes to crypto. So kind of going back to that question of why DePIN sort of started from crypto and sort of what kind of crypto ideals sort of really drove it. I think the major one for me was censorship resistance. With the idea of when kind of Bitcoin and blockchain really started kind of coming together, it was this idea of decentralized money and kind of putting the power back into people's hands when it comes to their financial freedom. And then when you kind of started to looking at Ethereum and Solana, and sort of you start to look at decentralized compute and smart contracts and all these things, I think naturally sort of when you kind of follow that path and thought process of just okay, we're putting all these things back into the power back into the hands of the people. Where are the other parts in the stack where censorship could actually happen? Because you could really think about Bitcoin, fundamentally is. It's worrisome for a lot of people with a lot of power and a lot to lose. And you kind of start to think about okay, where can they, if they really wanted to throttle it, where could they do it? And I think, you could really just say it's oh, they could censor the internet, which is fundamentally just a bunch of information and pipes in the ground. So it's kind of starting to think about okay, how do we start to make that aspect of the stack censorship resistant? And, DePIN kind of comes and plays a huge role in that for me.
Yeah, that's a good point. What I really love about DePIN is that it's actually solving real problems. And it's usually things that you can touch, right? For example, the Hive mapper thing, it solves the problem that you go on Google Map and everything is blurry and old and data from a few years ago. And then Hive mapper refreshes data every few minutes when a taxi drives around there and has a Hive mapper cam in there. Or with Shadow Drive, you can save data on chain. Or at the last Breakpoint conference, for example, there was someone who built a decentralized vending machine. So he 3D printed a bunch of parts. He put a QR code on it, Solana Pay QR code. You scan it. You pay I don't know, 5 USDC on your phone. The thing rotates, and you get a pack of cards or something. And I think to me, this is things that could be really revolutionary, especially in the future. Maybe we have vending machines everywhere where you just have people fill them up themselves, put QR codes on it, and I mean, maybe you need to look at the health of the products in there, but if it's just things toys or something, I think this would be cool. So I think this is solving real problems, and I'm very excited about that.
So I guess speaking of real problems, one of you had kind of mentioned just the fact that the internet is mostly run by 4 or 5 different companies, and this just massive centralization problem. That's probably why all of us work in this space. And we saw Facebook rebrand to Meta in order to appeal to this kind of internet native generation. I want to ask about legacy companies. Let's say they're interested in DePIN. Will they turn their centralized systems into DePIN products, or do they have to start from scratch? How will that work? I know many legacy projects now have Web3 divisions. Is this an onboarding opportunity? Can they take what we're building and sort of plug into it, or how does that work? And I know that's a big question, but maybe we can break that down a little bit to just understand how we can think about very established companies using what we're building, or the ideas or the tech behind it at least.
So I think because to your point, there's a lot to unpack there. But you got to start with the why. like legacy companies, Web 2 companies, they have to have a reason. And that reason isn't, well, it's decentralized. That reason isn't, well, the power is in the hands of the individuals, right? That reason has to be, here is how it makes your business better. Here is how we, makes your life easier, right? And that's where I kind of go back to, the hexagonal wheels analogy. They, onboarding them in terms of like taking what they're doing and moving it like onto Web3, that's just a tech question. That's easy. Relatively speaking, that's easy. Yes, it takes time, it takes effort, and everything like that to make that transition. But you know what those steps are. But you got to ask, why would they care? And like that's one of the, I think foundational questions that a lot of DePIN projects are starting to work on. I know we did. I've seen, from IONET, the same thing. It's, okay, I need to have a really solid pitch where I can talk to you about like, this is going to cut your expenses significantly. And why is it going to do that? Well, it's because the infrastructure is being run by individual people, but it's still providing you the same level of performance, it's still providing the same level of security and stability. And those three things, like those are tickets to play. Those aren't things that we can say like, it's a, like a nice to have. But I think, the more that we have a focus on thinking about the benefits for onboarding these users, like true benefits, that go beyond like kind of the nebulous, like decentralized or censorship resistant or this, that, or the other, because those are edge cases for businesses. The more success we're going to see bringing those companies on, being able to tell them that, the benefit to Web3 DePIN is that, each individual person is running a portion of this program on their computer or on their phone. And because of that, it's happening at a much, much cheaper price point, which means you can save, X percent on expenses per year, and this is going to allow you to do X, Y, Z with your business. Those are the things that, those are the things that are going to entice Web 2 businesses. The question of how we do it, and the question of, what steps need to be taken to get them onboarded. Again, that's the easy stuff. That's not a motivator.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think, with centralization and decentralization, it's sort of, I'm not a maxi on either side. I think there's sort of like an equilibrium that we'll eventually reach in terms of like centralized entities and decentralized solutions. And sort of, there'll probably be like certain use cases and, like specific customer segments that are better served by decentralized products and services, which is like some that'll always need some kind of like centralized provider to actually do what they need to do. So I think there's, like always going to be room for both. In terms of sort of like whether, I think like a incumbent Web 2 centralized provider will, start to move into Web 3 DePIN. Yeah, I agree with Frank that, it's these Web 2 companies, or honestly any company, is like at the end of the day they're profit driven, right? Like they have to make returns for shareholders, and that's kind of what they're trying to like maximize there. And at the end of the day, they're going to approach it as sort of like a business decision, and is this an investment worth making over versus like trying to maximize centralization. So I spend a decent amount of time thinking about this, especially in the context of what we do at IONET, and at IONET, to kind of not to like shill here, but basically we're trying to solve sort of like a GPU supply shortage, right? And like that's just kind of the nature of the market right now. But with every shortage, at some point that will ease up, and we'll kind of get back to some sort of equilibrium there, and likely sort of more supply than demand at a certain point. And I can kind of see a world in which, even though we sort of compete with the AWS and Google Clouds of the world technically today, if those centralized competitors actually start to have latent compute capacity there's a world in which they can start to plug that latent capacity into DePIN, start getting utilization out of it while waiting for the next customer who needs their centralized service to come in and like use it. So I think there's kind of a equilibrium and balance that we can strike there.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I'm a bit skeptical. Like, from my experience, companies that are big and old, they don't like change. So I was working for 10 years in a games company, and at every Christmas party, I was going to the CEO, and I was saying, like, hey, should we not do something with crypto? And usually it was like, no, it's too risky, or we don't want to do it for whatever reason. So what could happen, like maybe rather, is that many of these companies get disrupted by things that come new, like Google Maps, maybe by HiveMapper, or like Shaga is like a gaming, streaming, decentralized platform. Maybe they also use Ionet, I'm not sure. But they might disrupt like gaming platforms where you like buy the games, because now you can just stream them online somewhere. Or decentralized storage could disrupt Dropbox, for example, or whatever. So I think this is maybe more likely, or maybe both happens, or maybe they notice like someone is coming and then they just buy them or whatever if they have enough money, but maybe then they are already strong enough to not want to be bought. So I don't know. I think currently it's like a huge opportunity for everyone to build something in the space, because yeah, you can disrupt stuff with that, because things weren't be possible before. Now that are possible on Solana.
Yeah, I think that's a really good reminder of why does this matter? And, you know, I think the average person probably doesn't care, like you mentioned, about decentralization, privacy. You know, people care about entertainment and making money or saving money and things like that. So we've been chatting about DePIN, kind of this big wide angle lens. I'd like to go in, you know, a bit now, narrow the scope of what we're talking about. There was a panel earlier today on data storage, and Bobby from CoinGecko kind of had this anecdote of like, you know, when you're putting data on chain and it's not getting used, like what is the point? That's kind of a waste of a lot of resources. So let's talk about, you know, kind of advantages and disadvantages within on-chain, off-chain, or maybe a hybrid data storage model within DePIN. What's your take on that one? And we'll start with Frank.
So I'll just say that I can appreciate the perspective. I think completely disagree with the take that just because data is not being used, that it's a waste of resources. That's what that's what Arctic storage is for, right? It's like it's cheap, super cost-effective storage that is rarely ever going to get accessed. But that storage has to be there, right? Those records, the data has to be there. If you lose all of the data that you're using in, quote, like, your hot storage, like the storage you're actively using, like you need to have it somewhere. But I think, the theme that's driving that comment speaks to where we're at in Web3, in the sense that, again, right now we're building the stepping stones that are going to get us to what the future state actually looks like. And building this, when you're running the stepping stones, it's usually not resource efficient. It's usually hard, right? Which is, any innovation is hard. I think, as I think about like on-chain versus off-chain and hybrid models, I think, becomes a question of like, are we deliberately building in the right direction, or in a specific direction for a specific reason? Because I think, especially over the past years, we've seen DePIN evolve. You've seen a lot of projects that they built their infrastructure, and they did it in a very rigid kind of way, in a way that doesn't allow them to adapt or evolve or change as new technologies come available, as additional stepping stones are laid. And they basically, in order to keep up or stay relevant, they have to fall back on using some type of quote off-chain solution. And you see that a lot of times because it's just a function of the progress that we're making. We're moving extremely fast, so it's not a bad thing. It's actually a very good thing, because it says like okay, we're continuing to make forward progress. I think speaking broadly, what we'll see is this shift over time, where we'll start to see more and more hybrid models evolve out of necessity. As we continue to develop the technology. But I think, it's a question of what is it that you're putting off-chain versus on-chain, and is that stuff that's off-chain, how important is that? If it were to get lost or censored or altered by a bad actor, is that something, like, what can you point to on-chain that says, like, no, it's fine, because look here, this allows us to rebuild all of that, right? Ideally, I think, like when you think about technology and its continued movement towards efficiency, I think we'll end up in a world where everything ends up actually on-chain when we get 10, 20 years down the road. But right now, what you're just seeing is, utilization of existing tech to allow us to continue to innovate for the future.
Very well said.
Yeah, I think I'll just add, I think Frank pretty much covered like the whole storage aspect of it, and I think he's kind of the expert on that. So I'll kind of come at it from sort of like a compute perspective, like on-chain versus off-chain compute, which is kind of what we're looking at. I think it really depends on, like, there's pros and cons to both, right? And it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. I think in the world that I live in, it's specifically, I kind of think about on-chain and off-chain compute when it comes to sort of like artificial intelligence models and like training and things like that. There's certain aspects of, like training AI models and sort of how you use them where it really makes more sense to, do a lot of off-chain computation, like, or like centralized computation. Because if you're going to train like a $70 billion parameter AI model, if you want to do that on-chain, that's going to be exceedingly expensive and really slow, and might not actually lead to the results you want, and you might want to kind of like think about like, why am I actually doing this on-chain? But there might be other sort of like processes that come to like, like AI model compute where you actually might want that computation to occur on-chain, like, for example, inference and, sort of like lower level computations, like you might want that to happen on-chain to sort of like have like a proof of inference or like proof of certain model usage, or, when it comes to data provenance and like royalty rights and kind of like making sure that the correct data owners are compensated, like that might be something like a transaction that you want to happen on-chain, and you might want to facilitate it that way. So I think it really comes down to the use case of what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I wanted to agree with Frank on the data that's not heavily used, actually, because like, if you have a backup, for example, you almost never use it, but when you need it, then you really need it. And another example for the on-chain, off-chain thing is like, I work a lot with NFTs. And there's this thing, if you have the off-chain data, which is like saved to the JSON file somewhere in a decentralized storage, and then you have the on-chain data. But if you let's for example, you have a game and you want to save the level of the game in the NFT, and you want to change the metadata, and the metadata is off-chain, then you can't do it in a program because you need to somehow upload new data to the off-chain storage. And this is always asynchronous, so you can't use it on-chain. So now with the new token extensions, metadata extension, for example, you can have data that is directly saved on-chain. So I think in this case, it's very valuable. But of course, it's way more expensive to save it in there. So what you can also do is instead of saving it in the state, you can save data in the ledger of the blockchain. Then you can't immediately read it, but you can always get the data back by looking at the logs of all the transactions that saved the data. And then the next step is to upload it somewhere to a decentralized storage. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's so much to unpack here. I mean, DePIN, I think it's some people think it's already a buzzword. I don't think it's even gotten, the traction that it probably will get. I think you guys are in for a pretty crazy ride these next couple of years. But I'd like to end, we have about 2 minutes left, and it would be great to kind of go down the line, and obviously, Solana community, lots of developers here. What are some killer Solana DePIN apps that you all want to see in the next couple of years? You're probably too busy to build them yourselves, so maybe we'll start with you, Jonas, and yeah, what do you want to see out there?
I want to see more stuff that people build themselves. So where they have a Raspberry Pi, they connect it to the blockchain somehow. They have some WebSocket connection that listens to account changes, and then they listen to LoRaWAN sensors. Like, for example, you have like a parking sensor somewhere. A car drives over, and you have a flag and an app that, oh, there's a parking spot there. Or you have like a parcel which has like a LoRaWAN sensor in it, and you don't have to stay at home all the time because you know, okay, the package is coming closer to me. I better stay home, and then I go shopping so I don't miss my package and have to drive to the post box. That happens in Germany all the time to me, by the way. So I would love this do-it-yourself stuff, and yeah, I leave the big projects to you guys.
Yeah, I love that. I think for me, like the holy grail of DePIN is fundamentally building. I'd love to see someone build like a decentralized internet. I think that's kind of what a lot of this is really building towards, and I think like what Genesis Go and what IONET are building are essentially fundamental building blocks to get us to that point, and I think that's like for us to be able to actually all connect to each other without having to depending on like a centralized provider or authority, I think will be really, really key going forward. And with Solana sort of being like the home of DePIN and the best place to build it, I think we'll likely see it happen here.
Yeah.
Yeah, It's what you're talking about, decentralized internet. It's like what we did yesterday with networking people's phones together. People will see that is like a big stepping stone towards mobile-powered decentralized internet. But I think for me, as I think about that question, I think I want to see something that none of us are thinking about, right? Like, if we're throwing out ideas up here, like the only reason why we haven't dove on it is because we're working on other things. Somebody's working on it. Like, I want to see what I would love to see from builders like you all is something we haven't thought of, something that nobody's thought of. What's a problem that nobody's really looking at, but actually is a big problem that needs to be solved. I think the next cool thing coming from Solana Deepin should be something that no one sees coming.
Or something that people currently think it's impossible. Like, for example, decentralized power grid or something. Many people think it's not possible because there's so much power in the power providers, but maybe someone can build it.
Mm-hmm.
Don't know until you try, right? Like, that's what I want to see. Let's try.
Yeah. Everything is possible.
Next year at Crossroads, let's see what people made possible. There's still so much to unpack and talk about. Unfortunately, we are at time, but thank you to each of you for being here and sharing your insights with everyone. I think it was a really inspiring chat, and it was a pleasure being up here with each of you. So
Thanks for
thank
having
you.
us.
Yeah.